I ranked every single game that I played in 2024. Some were old, some were new, but let's talk about them. We'll start with the very worst game on my list, number 37. Naruto Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections, released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2023. Connections is the 7th title in the Ultimate Ninja Storm series. It was developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco. As an enormous Naruto and Naruto Shippuden fan, I was hyped for this title, even though I read very little Boruto and don't know too much about it. In 2013, leading up to the release of Storm 3, I watched every trailer over and over again. When the game finally came out, I played it and I loved all the effort and fan service in that game. Even though the developers reused many animations, combos, ultimate jutsu, and awakenings, I still had a really good time with it and was really pleased. I enjoyed Storm 4 as well, but I didn't have as much fun with that game and I played it much less than Storm 3. Still, I was all in when I purchased Storm Connections, expecting a well-done story mode and lots of new content. But man oh man, was I in for a disappointment. There are 2 separate story modes in this title, History Mode and Special Mode. History Mode consists of the entirety of Naruto Shippuden, but it was done with no love and in the laziest way possible. The story is told through these still storyboard frames, and many important battles and story elements were missing. I'm pretty sure most, if not all, of the story boss fights were just copy and pasted from previous Storm games as well. Keep in mind, Storm 4 came out way back in 2016, 7 years prior to this title. The special story mode took place in the Boruto timeline and consisted of a mystery involving a virtual reality gaming console, which kind of reminded me of the first season of Sword Art Online. This story was kind of interesting, and there were some cool cutscenes, but overall, it still felt lackluster. The roster was probably the most disappointing part of this terrible entry. Technically, there was a huge number of new characters added since Storm 4, but most of these were just palette swaps. Many characters from Shippuden got Boruto makeovers, but still had the same combos, jutsu, ultimates, and awakenings as their older counterparts. On top of that, an overwhelming number of returning characters had nothing new in their movesets, some wielding the same techniques and animations from Storm 2, which was released way back in 2010. This whole affair just felt like a lazy, copy and paste cash grab. There was no love, no fan service, and no reason to play this game. Storm Connections was the worst game I played in 2024, hands down. If you love Naruto, Bandai Namco does not deserve your money for this travesty, and if you don't love Naruto, it's even more of the reason to skip it. Number 36. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Radical Rescue, released for the Nintendo Game Boy in 1993. Radical Rescue was developed and published by Konami. Since I really enjoyed the second game, Back from the Sewers, when I beat it in 2022, I had high hopes for this one. Not only is the physical cart for this game quite expensive, but things I read about Radical Rescue had me pretty interested. In Radical Rescue, the player starts out as Michelangelo and must rescue the other turtles one by one, as well as Splinter and April O'Neil. Every time you rescue a turtle, you gain that turtle as a playable character, and each one has a unique ability. This title is a mix of Metroid and the first NES Turtles game. Playing through Radical Rescue, I found that there was some cool level design and learned that instead of separate levels or stages, the entire game is one gigantic dungeon. Unfortunately, I also found this game mind-blowingly difficult, and each boss took me many tries to defeat. The bosses weren't particularly fun either, and there was a brutal boss gauntlet at the end of the game, which took me quite a bit of practice to get through. Bosses in this title consist of Scratch, Dirtbag, Triceraton, Scaletail, and Cyber Shredder. Radical Rescue was definitely interesting, but it just isn't my cup of tea, and isn't a title I would ever go back to. I do not recommend playing this game, even though it is kind of a strange oddity.
My name is Towjim.
And I'm Big Earl.
We come from outer space. Whoa.
Number 35, Towjim and Earl, Back in the Groove, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. Towjim and Earl Back in the Groove is the fourth entry in the Towjim and Earl series, and the first title since 2002's Towjim and Earl 3 Mission to Earth. This game plays nearly identically to the first title for the Sega Genesis. Something I found cool and different from that game is that this entry features 9 different playable characters and 4-player co-op. I played through the original many times as a kid, but I never beat it. And since 2008, my wife and I played the original multiple times as well, and in each instance it went the same way. My wife would get bored and quit within 45 minutes or so. Then I would keep playing until I got a game over. Throughout the years, I never managed to beat the original Towjim and Earl, despite trying in earnest to do so more than a few times. Back in the Groove, I played once, and with my wife. It started like it usually does. She got bored 30 minutes into the playthrough and quit. I kept playing, expecting to experience a game over, just like the many times I played the Sega Genesis entry. But something was different. The difficulty of the original game wasn't present here. Before I knew it, the game was over. I beat it. I didn't feel like celebrating though, as the magic of the original game was not there. While I'm aware of more difficulty settings and characters to play, meh. I don't plan on playing this title ever again. I'd rather just play the much tougher original. Number 34, Kirbys Dreamland, released for the Nintendo Game Boy in 1992. Kirbys Dreamland is the first game in the Kirby series and consists of only 5 short levels, in which Kirby must retrieve the sparkling stars and food of Dreamland from King Day. Kirby does not possess his copy abilities in this game like he does in later games. I remember beating this title at my cousin's house as a little kid, and I thought it was pretty good. Replaying it in 2024, I made some observations, most of which were negative. Kirbys Dreamland is very short, even for a handheld Game Boy title. Kirby can't absorb enemies, and thus has very limited options. I found the controls were slippery, and yet everything here was still super easy. There were a couple minor bright spots though, as this game boasted some decent bosses, and there was a fun little boss gauntlet at the end. Overall, I felt Kirbys Dreamland was cute and charming, but there isn't enough substance there. This game is not worth playing. Number 33, Euden Chronicle Rising, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2022. Euden Chronicle Rising is a 2D action role-playing game developed by Natsume Atari and published by 505 Games. Rising is the first game to be released in the Euden Chronicle series, considered to be a spiritual successor to the Suikoden series. Rising is based heavily around building a town and treasure hunting. The progression actually felt pretty decent, and recruiting the 2 additional playable characters was fun, but the title felt like playing a low-budget, low-effort mobile game for the most part. To progress through the story, the player has to revisit the same areas over and over again to gather materials and complete quests for the NPCs in the town. Completing certain quests unlocks new gear or even expands areas in the town that you're creating. I played this game quite a bit in the few short days that it took me to complete it, due to the somewhat addicting progression system, which requires the player to do quite a bit of grinding. Overall, the story and gameplay were forgettable, and I don't think back fondly on this title. Considering this game is really short, on top of not being polished or good, playing through it is simply a waste of a few days. Skip this game and play something better. Number 32, Cotton Fantasy, Superlative Night Dreams, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2022. Cotton Fantasy is a 2D shmup done in the cute-em-up style, co-developed by Success in Studio Seizensen and originally released in Japanese arcades in 2021. It was later ported to the Switch and PS4. This title is the 6th installment in the Cotton franchise and is a follow-up to Rainbow Cotton and the first main entry of the series in over 20 years. Players assume the role of the young witch Cotton or one of the other 6 characters, each one having their own unique gameplay style. And they're on a quest to defeat enemies and bosses to retrieve Willow Candy for Fairyland. I beat this game during a long car ride, and it barely even served as a distraction. The story seemed just overly ridiculous and nonsensical. I zoned out during some of these cutscenes, which I felt were overly long. This title was way too easy on the default difficulty, and while I'm sure I could have made it harder, that's not really my job. I'd recommend skipping this one, but I do intend to try Cotton Reboot on the Switch in 2025. Number 31, Princess Peach Showtime, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2024. Showtime was developed by Goodfeel and published by Nintendo. This title is the first game to feature Princess Peach as the main protagonist since Super Princess Peach in 2005. The story of Showtime didn't really grab me. While Peach and some of the toads from Mushroom Kingdom visit a theater, a wicked sorceress named Grape and her minions, the Sour Bunch, invade and take over. In this game, every level has a unique theme and Peach transformation. These transformations each played much differently and consisted of Sword Fighter Peach, Ninja Peach, Cowgirl Peach, Figure Skater Peach, Detective Peach, which was my favorite, Dashing Thief Peach, Mighty Peach, Mermaid Peach, and Kung Fu Peach. Despite all the variety, the mechanics felt too simple for this to be much of a plus. Showtime is a cute game with some nice personality, but this title does not feel like a first-party Nintendo game in any way, shape, or form. I did enjoy the Detective Peach levels, which were pretty unique, but the Switch has an awesome library and there are much better games to play. Number 30, Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2021. Sister Location is the 5th main installment in the Five Nights at Freddy's series and is set at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a sister location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. The player controls a new employee who must perform maintenance work while defending themselves from deadly animatronics. I played this title on the Five Nights at Freddy's Core Collection, but the game's initial release was in 2016 on Steam. The gameplay here is much different from the previous titles I've played, as it grants players mobility between rooms where tasks and challenges are completed. I found Night 4 to be insanely difficult, but the challenge was kind of fun, and I'd say it was the most enjoyment that I got out of this game. The secret room and minigame at the end of Sister Location were really tough and added a lot of playtime to this game, which otherwise would have been very short. Sister Location felt low budget and not very polished. I get that that's part of the charm for the series, but this title just wasn't it for me. I didn't hate this game, but I enjoyed it quite a bit less than Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and 2, and less than 29 other games on this year's list. Number 29, Pokemon Legends Arceus, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2022. Arceus was developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. It is part of the 8th generation of the Pokemon video game series. The story of Arceus follows a protagonist who is sent back in time and travels through the Hisui region. Unlike the Pokemon games that came before Arceus, the Pokemon in the areas of this game wander around the landscape and will interact with both the player and their environments. Also, unlike previous titles, the player character can be attacked and harmed by wild Pokemon. Legends Arceus was a very popular title when it dropped, and I was excited to give it a go. Unfortunately, I found the overall story and mountains of text in this game to be boring. I was not a fan of how squishy all Pokemon seemed to be in this game, including boss type encounters. My impression of the combat was that either I KO'd my opponents instantly with a single attack, or my Pokemon got taken out in a single round. Few battles throughout my playthrough felt even, competitive, or fun. The gameplay in Arceus did not seem smooth to me. I didn't enjoy the engine, the format of the missions, or the layouts of the areas in town. I definitely prefer the classic style more than this Legend style, yet at the same time, I had a really good time playing Pokemon Violet in 2023, which was done in a sort of similar style as Arceus. Number 28, Dead by Daylight, released for the Microsoft Xbox One in 2017. Dead by Daylight was developed and published by Canadian studio Behavior Interactive. DBD is an online survival horror game which is done in a 1 versus 4 style, in which one player takes on the role of a killer and the other 4 play as survivors. The killer must hunt and impale each survivor on sacrificial hooks to appease a malevolent force known as the Entity, while the survivors have to avoid being caught while attempting to power up exit gates by working together to fix 5 generators. I watched others play this title over the years, and finally I gave it a shot with Epion, a viewer of my Twitch channel. We only played it once, and I didn't get to experience the varied gameplay styles that are here, but that being said, I didn't enjoy the experience that I did have. The gameplay felt repetitive, uninteresting, and unrewarding. DBD features lots of characters and killers, and there's a lot of replay value here. Some of the other killers might have caught my interest if I had played the game more, but I did not. Number 27, Dino Crisis, released for the Sony PlayStation in 1999. Dino Crisis is a survival horror game developed and published by Capcom. It was actually developed by the same team behind Capcom's Resident Evil series, including director Shinji Mikami, and feels quite a bit like Resident Evil with dinosaurs. The story follows Regina, a special operations agent sent with a team to investigate a secluded island research facility. Finding the place overrun with dinosaurs, Regina must fight through the facility to discover its secrets and ultimately escape alive with her team. Like the earlier Resident Evil games, this title had an emphasis on survival, as a player doesn't have the ammo to just fight everything. The player has to run away and plan smart routes to make it through this game. Dino Crisis featured lots of backtracking and puzzle solving, but I kinda dug the format. The puzzles were pretty cool, and I liked the DDK system. Dino Crisis suffered from fugly early PS1 FMVs, which were some of the worst that I've seen in recent years. Unfortunately, this game felt and looked extremely dated, and I couldn't wait to finish it so I could move on to something else. Number 26, Pokemon Shield, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. Pokemon Shield was developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. Shield, along with Sword, are the first installments in the 8th generation of the Pokemon series. Like previous installments, the games follow a young Pokemon trainer as they train and battle Pokemon, aiming to defeat the Pokemon champion. Shield introduced the Dynamax and Gigantamax mechanics, which cause a player's Pokemon to grow to a significantly larger size and use more powerful attacks in battle. I had low expectations for Shield after hearing many negative things when the title first released. After playing this game, I found Shield had better characters in general than most of the Pokemon games that I've played. The gym leaders were more interesting than any of the characters in Arceus or Pokemon Violet, in my opinion. That being said, I noticed this game felt a lot smaller and less alive than Pokemon Violet. Shield is not a bad game, but I tore through it and stopped playing immediately after completing the story. Overall, this title wasn't worth playing, but it still isn't terrible. Number 25, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, released for the Sony PlayStation 4 in 2020. Kakarot is an action role-playing game developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment. The game follows the main protagonist of the Dragon Ball franchise, Goku, and his friends, the Z Fighters, throughout the events of the Dragon Ball Z anime. The opening video and song for this title are amazing and got me pretty excited for the game. I'm a huge DBZ fan, and Cha-La-La always gets me in the feels. The way the developers told the story in this title was fantastic, and it really feels like you were in the world of Dragon Ball. In the original anime, I was unhappy with the Buu saga, especially after Buu split into two. This game did that portion of the story way better than the original anime. It was handled wonderfully. Unfortunately, there was a lot of negative when it comes to this title. The developers did a poor job with tons of fetch questing, and I didn't particularly like the combat here. I wasn't a fan of how enemies would tank attacks and complete their techniques while getting hit, but if the player gets hit, you get interrupted and can't do anything. If you're a big fan of Dragon Ball Z, I think this game is worth one playthrough just to see how great they did with the story and the world, but the gameplay itself is not very good, so I would never play this a second time, and I would not recommend it to anyone that's not a fan of the series. Number 24, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2021. Freddy's 2 is a point-and-click survival horror game developed and published by Scott Cawthon. Set in a fictional pizzeria, the player takes on the role of night security guards Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith, defending themselves from the restaurant's hostile animatronic mascots. I really enjoyed this game, but it had some issues that kept it from being a great title. I found FNAF 2 to be deeper than FNAF 1, but still not especially deep. The music box mechanic gave the players something to do to stay busy during downtime, while the animatronics weren't otherwise being aggressive. And yet, the music box makes the player feel a lot of pressure and can be kind of annoying. I felt many of the deaths that I experienced in my playthrough seemed cheap. The atmosphere in this title was much less scary, and the jump scares much less shocking than the first game, which was a little disappointing, but FNAF 2 is still a decent little horror title. Number 23, Dragon Ball FighterZ, released for the Sony PlayStation 4 in 2018. Dragon Ball FighterZ was published by Bandai Namco Entertainment and is a 2D fighting game based on the Dragon Ball franchise. I understand that this is considered a really good fighting game, but I'm no good at 2D fighters, which hurt my enjoyment of this title. FighterZ has great fan service and content from a Dragon Ball fan's perspective. Combat in this game is genuinely fun, with engaging mechanics and flashy techniques. Unfortunately though, I'm just not into the 2D fighter genre, and there were quite a few games that I enjoyed more in 2024. Number 22, Fortnite, released for the Xbox Series X in 2018 and the Nintendo Switch in 2020. Fortnite was developed by Epic Games and is a battle royale in which up to 100 players fight to be the last person standing. Fortnite is a title that I usually play every year with friends and family. Speaking of which, this is a great game to play with others and can be a lot of fun. In 2024, I played with coworkers, my friend Kevin and his son, and my own children as well. Fortnite is very easy to get into, simple to learn, but difficult to master. The developers constantly update Fortnite. If you take a few months away from the game, you're going to find lots of new content when you dive back into it. For me, Fortnite does get boring and repetitive quick, and I usually don't play it for more than a couple days without needing a big break. Number 21, Mario & Luigi Brothership, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2024. Mario & Luigi Brothership is a turn-based RPG developed by Acquire and published by Nintendo. It is the 6th main installment in the Mario & Luigi series, following Paper Jam in 2015. After the appearance of a mysterious portal, Mario and Luigi find themselves transported to the world of Concordia, where they find themselves working to reunite the land after a dark force called Gloam begins wreaking havoc in Concordia. The first thing I noticed playing through Brothership was there was lots of long, boring text, similar to the start of Pikmin 4 and Pokemon Violet, but those are both games I like. Unlike those games, the mountains of text never ceased and the story never got interesting. I guess there was an effort to make the text whimsical and funny, but I felt the jokes were just low-effort puns. The story was boring and built around an uninspired premise. NPCs in this title consisted of one-dimensional characters with really weak designs. Brothership did feature some nice character progression and fun combat. There were tons of simple puzzles, which I kind of enjoyed. The gameplay loop was addictive, but this title was way too long. I believe I clocked over 63 hours in Brothership. I will end this on a positive note. The final sequences in this game were really well done. I live streamed the end of Brothership, and viewers were confused as to why I was bashing the game so much, since the final sequences were fun and looked pretty neat. Number 20, Parasite Eve 2, released for the Sony PlayStation in 1999. Parasite Eve 2 is an action role-playing game developed and published by Square. PE2 is set 3 years after the events of the original game. In this title, Aya Brea becomes involved with another outbreak of neo-mitochondrial creatures. The gameplay diverges from the previous game, as battles take place in real time and the area of action is much less restrictive. This approach is more typical of traditional survival horror games, although some role-playing elements are retained. This title was written and directed by Kenichi Iwao, who wrote Resident Evil. My first impressions of Parasite Eve 2 were mostly negative. I found this title was not as polished or interesting as the first game. The story was poor, with an uninteresting plot and one-dimensional, boring characters. Combat felt clunky, but at the same time, it was kind of fun. As I got deeper into PE2, I started to really enjoy the progression, and I wanted to kill every single enemy on every single map. When I reached the end of the game, I learned there were multiple endings, and I got the quote-unquote bad ending. I might give this title another shot next Halloween. Who knows? Number 19, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1990. This game was originally released as a coin-operated arcade game, which we played last year. Later, this title was ported to the NES with 2 extra levels. This was a challenging game, but the challenge felt fair. Something I really enjoyed here is that the player benefits from employing tactics against the final boss. You have to really pay attention, think, and strategize to come out on top, which I think is really cool. This title has a nice variety of enemies and bosses, which was lacking in some of the other older Turtles games. TMNT 2 is not as polished as TMNT 3 The Manhattan Project, but you can make the argument that this game is better. Both have their place and are worth a go for TMNT fans. Number 18, Fitness Boxing, Fist of the Northstar, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2023. Fitness Boxing, Fist of the Northstar is a fitness game published by Imagineer and is the third entry in the Fitness Boxing series and is the first one themed around a separate IP, specifically the Fist of the Northstar anime series. This title legitimately gave me some great workouts. There was decent hit detection once you figure out what the game wants from you, but there's definitely a learning curve. While the bar might be low, this was the best exercise video game that I've ever played. Once I completed the story mode, I wasn't too interested in playing this game again. There were some extras, but they really could have added some more content to get a player coming back once the story's finished. Number 17, Stellar Blade released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2024. Stellar Blade is an action-adventure game developed by Shift Up and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. In this title, players take control of the protagonist, Eve, as she embarks on a mission to save humanity from deadly creatures called Natibas. Stellar Blade has a fun, deep combat system, but some of the platforming was tedious. There was a cool progression system, and by the end of the game, I really needed to learn how to use all the skills and abilities for the last few boss fights. The late game bosses really forced me to learn equipment and the different builds to progress, although I was able to complete the earlier levels without really learning how the game works. I found the story to be kind of boring and the characters weak, although some of the character designs were really cool, especially the females. I was being accused of not paying attention to the story and lore by viewers on my Twitch, and while that's true to an extent, much of the story was found through text after discovering the many human corpses throughout the many areas. In my opinion, this was a pretty boring way to world build. Stellar Blade has a kind of Blade Runner style vibe, but I never really felt immersed in the environment. I liked doing the side quests when I had a map handy, but without the use of a map in some of the areas, it did not seem worth it to do the side quests. The ending was thought-provoking and had me interested in the already announced sequel. As a final note about this game, the boss fights were incredible, and they really made me enjoy some of my time with this title. If epic, challenging boss fights full of parrying is something you're looking for in a game, then Stellar Blade might be the title for you. Number 16, Super Castlevania 4, released for the Super Nintendo in 1991. Super Castlevania 4 is an action platformer game developed and published by Konami. This game takes place in 1691 in Transylvania, where the vampire hunter Simon Belmont must defeat the vampire Dracula. This title received critical acclaim and is considered by many to be one of the greatest video games of all time. Let's get this out of the way first. Super Castlevania 4 has an incredible soundtrack. It's basically perfect. This title is filled with fun boss fights and NES hard challenges. While the difficulty was tough, but fair throughout, this game was a little bit too generous with the checkpoints in the final boss gauntlet at the end of the game. To sum everything up, this is a great title, close in quality to the first Castlevania game, and I'm happy to have played it. Number 15, Final Fantasy VII Remake, released for the Sony PlayStation 4 in 2020. Remake is an action role-playing game developed and published by Square Enix. It is the first in a planned trilogy of games remaking the 1997 PlayStation game Final Fantasy VII. Set in the dystopian cyberpunk metropolis of Midgar, players control the mercenary Cloud Strife. Cloud joins Avalanche, an eco-terrorist group trying to stop the powerful mega-corporation Shinra from using the planet's life essence as an energy source. It took me a little while to start enjoying this title, but once I got familiar with how the weapons and progression system work, I liked it quite a bit. The combat opened up a lot as the game progressed as well. There was a lot more depth and subtlety in the battle system than I first realized. I had lots of nostalgia for the scenes and characters in this game, but they also added and expanded on the story. By the end of this title, I felt that it was more of a paralleled sequel than a remake, similar to the different parallels in the Saturn title Dark Savior. Some of the expanded storytelling was well welcomed, like getting a proper backstory for Jesse, but other parts of the story felt like fluff and busy work, like doing side missions where I had to find missing cats and posters. The boss fights were epic and mostly very enjoyable. While this isn't one of the best games ever, it's worth a play for fans of Final Fantasy. Number 14, God of War, released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in 2005. God of War is an action-adventure hack-and-slash game developed by Santa Monica Studio and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. This title is the first installment in the God of War series, and the third chronologically. Loosely based on Greek mythology, it is set in ancient Greece, where the player controls Kratos, a Spartan warrior who serves the Olympian gods. The goddess Athena tasks Kratos with killing Ares, the god of war and Kratos' former mentor, who tricked Kratos into killing his wife and daughter. This title was riddled with simple yet satisfying puzzles. Combat was extremely fun, with a nice variety of combos and abilities, which expanded as the game progressed. This game oozed immersion, from the setting to the story to the music. The Pandora's Box dungeon was huge and well designed, with tons of fun puzzles. It was also pretty awesome that the last Titan held the dungeon on his back. This was just a really nice touch. On the negative side, and this might be a bit of a nitpick, I felt that there were far too few boss fights here. I love the boss fights that were present, but there just wasn't many of them. That being said, God of War was the start of one of Sony's most popular franchises, and is a title worth playing. Number 13, Sea of Stars, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2023. Sea of Stars was developed and published by Sabotage Studio, and it is set primarily on an archipelago of islands in a fantasy world, where the player controls either Valkyrie or Zale, solstice warriors who use the power of the sun and moon. They journey throughout the world on a quest to destroy powerful monsters called Dwellers, and to stop the immortal alchemists who created them. This game was interesting, simple, and fun. The story and world building were well done, especially when expanded with the stories of Teaks. I found the art and characters to be comforting and whimsical, and I enjoyed the fun dialogue. In regard to character progression, level ups seemed pretty rare, and it took a while to see any noticeable increase in the strength of your team. Progression is very important to me in RPGs, and this hurt the game's ranking quite a bit. This title was lacking in hidden and secret content, although there was some. Later in the game, there's this awesome sequence where you finally unlock the Sea of Stars, and the player learns there are many corrupted worlds which you can go to and save. But unfortunately, the player only gets to travel to one single additional world to save, and I felt that this was wasted potential. Being able to travel to several worlds with different problems to solve could have been really interesting and could have really expanded the playtime here. Still, with that being said, this title is worth a play. Number 12, Breath of Fire 4, released for the Sony PlayStation in the year 2000. Breath of Fire 4 was developed by Capcom and is the fourth game in the Breath of Fire series. Just as in previous games of the series, Breath of Fire 4 follows the adventures of a young man named Ryu, who has the ability to transform into powerful dragons. Some of the characters in this iteration were one-dimensional and not too interesting. The story starts out really slow, and yet the early parts also feel quite rushed somehow at the same time. Nina, Ryu, and Cray don't get proper personalities or stories, in my opinion. It seemed like the developers were trying to piggyback on Breath of Fire 3. I enjoyed the Fao Lu character and his side story. He seemed like an evil, all-powerful dragon god when the player was first introduced to him, but he viewed himself as a protagonist trying to do what's best for all people, kind of similar to Miria in Breath of Fire 3. I watched his character grow and develop in ways that most other characters in this title never do. The towns in Breath of Fire 4 are pretty small and tightly packed with stuff that gets in your way. With the isometric camera and all the buildings, it was pretty hard to find things I was looking for. I enjoyed the character progression system for the most part, and the narrative really came together in the end, but some of the plot was left unfinished and unexplored. Specifically, I was disappointed that I didn't get a proper final showdown with Yuna. There wasn't much post-game content in this title. While this game did a great job at allowing you to become very powerful and to combo tons of cool techniques together, there were very few strong enemies to show off against. The Rider was considered the most powerful enemy in the game, but I defeated him way before I got to the end and way before I obtained the most powerful gear. Also, I noticed that there was some terrible slowdown in some areas of this title, especially in the towns. I'm a fan of the Breath of Fire series, and I'd say this title is worth playing, though it isn't as good as the second or third entries. Number 11, Castlevania Bloodlines, released for the Sega Genesis in 1994. Bloodlines, known in PAL regions as Castlevania: The New Generation, was developed and published by Konami. In this title, a vampire named Elizabeth Bartley is orchestrating the beginning of World War I to serve as the catalyst for the resurrection of her uncle, Dracula. Players take on the roles of John Morris and Eric Lecard to take up the fight against evil. Bloodlines is the only Castlevania game that I owned as a child. I beat it over and over and over again. Playing for the first time in a couple decades overwhelmed me with nostalgia. The music here is wonderful and gets you really pumped up to slay monsters, which is par for the course with this series. The controls in Bloodlines are tight and responsive. The level design is clever and immersive. The combat just feels so satisfying with 16-bit special effects that wowed me as a kid and also wowed me as an adult. The opening cutscene was memorable and well done. This is a game that was made with love, and you could feel that while playing through it. Bloodlines is also very, very short, but two playable characters with slightly different paths gives some replay value. I beat Bloodlines in 2024 twice consecutively, and it was well worth my time. Number 10, Helldivers 2, released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2024. Helldivers 2 is a cooperative third-person shooter developed by Arrowhead Game Studios and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. The story follows the Helldivers, an elite force of shock troops dispatched to combat various threats to humanity. Fighting to save democracy in multiplayer is a great time, and the world of Helldivers is immersive and awesome. This title features incredibly hectic, fun combat. Helldivers 2 has an interesting progression system where you unlock new weapons and stratagems the more you play. Players throughout all servers are in an actual war against an alien race called Terminids and a race of robots called automatons. I wish I played this more in 2024, but the time I did have with this game was fantastic and unforgettable. 100% worth my time.
Colors weave into a spire of flame. Distant sparks call to a past still unnamed.
Number 9, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2018. Smash Ultimate is a crossover fighting game developed by Bandai Namco Studios and published by Nintendo. It is the 5th installment in the Super Smash Bros. Series and features 89 playable fighters, including all characters from previous Smash Bros. Games as well as newcomers. These characters represent first-party Nintendo franchises like Super Mario, Kirby, Metroid, Star Fox, and The Legend of Zelda, as well as third-party franchises like Metal Gear, Street Fighter, Final Fantasy, and Kingdom Hearts. And there are many more that I didn't name, but let's move on. My daughters asked to try this game, and I figured they'd play it for a bit and get bored. But they completed over 50 matches and unlocked a bunch of characters on their first play session. As someone who grew up with Nintendo, I've got to say, Smash Ultimate had so much fan service and was such a great time. Unlocking characters and learning how to play them never got old. The story itself was kind of boring and dragged on way too long. That being said, I had a blast playing this game, and the amount of content here is staggering. If you own a Nintendo Switch, Smash Ultimate is a must-buy. Number 8, Cuphead, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. Cuphead is a run-and-gun video game developed and published by Canadian developer studio MDHR. The game follows a teacup-headed character and his brother, Mugman, as they take on the devil and his minions. The game's creators took inspiration from the golden age of American animation and the aesthetics of the 1930s. Before playing Cuphead for the first time, I heard it was a brutally difficult game. I played it, and the people were correct. It was hard. Hard at the same time. There was a rewarding progression system where the player earns coins to use at a shop to purchase new abilities, and I felt motivated to obtain every single coin that I could. There was just so much personality in the overworld map and the brief cutscenes. Game developers don't need to break the bank and create 30-minute long cutscenes to develop characters and immerse the player in a world. Cuphead does it wonderfully with much, much less. Cuphead isn't just difficult and charming, it's smart too. There were some super clever levels and bosses that had me smiling every time I died, and I died often. The DLC was also fantastic. King's Leap was creative, awesome, and a joy to play through. If you're a player that likes a challenge with some cartoony, silly art, Cuphead is just the game for you. Number 7. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2024. Sparking Zero is a fighting game based on the Dragon Ball franchise created by Akira Toriyama, and it's the 4th main installment in the Budokai Tenkaichi series. This title was developed by Spike Chunsoft and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment. I made a video ranking my top 20 favorite fights in Dragon Ball, and I threw it up on YouTube in the week leading up to the release of this title. I and others in my circle were super pumped for Sparking Zero, and man, none of us were disappointed. Sparking Zero had incredible fan service and was on par with the Tenkaichi games of old. The combat system was quite difficult to learn, but it felt really good once you became comfortable with it. The PvP was decent, and I had some really fun matches, not only on Ranked, but with Epion, Kevin, and some other followers of my stream. The what-if scenario paths during the campaign were really funny and had me invested, although some of the requirements for unlocking the alternate paths were kind of ridiculous. If you're a fan of Dragon Ball, I highly recommend this title. The roster is wonderful, and the what-if scenarios are worth playing through and experiencing. Number 6. Resident Evil 4 Remake, released for the Xbox Series X in 2023. Resident Evil 4 is a survival horror game developed and published by Capcom. This title is a remake of the 2005 game Resident Evil 4. In RE4 Remake, the player controls U.S. agent Leon Scott Kennedy, who must save Ashley Graham, the daughter of the United States president, from a mysterious cult in Spain. I beat the original RE4 a decade or so ago, and I really didn't think a remake was needed. That being said, I ranked this title very high in my 2024 list. RE4 Remake boasts great controls, an immersive atmosphere, and a fun progression system through treasure hunting and weapon upgrading. The gore and graphics were top notch. I knocked out the DLC after completing the main game, and I didn't regret a single second that I played this excellent remake. Number 5. Hogwarts Legacy, released for the Nintendo Switch in 2023. Hogwarts Legacy is an action RPG developed by Avalanche Software and published by Warner Bros. Games. The story takes place a century prior to the Harry Potter novels. The player controls a student enrolled at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry who learns to wield magical abilities and investigates mysteries at the school. I am not a Harry Potter fan, but I can't deny how good this title is. The format of Hogwarts Legacy reminded me quite a bit of The Witcher 3, which is a good thing. I found the story in Hogwarts Legacy interesting, and that's coming from someone who just isn't a fan of the lore. I found the combat and numerous puzzles to be fantastic. There was so much to do and so many locations to explore, it was almost overwhelming. The side quests jump out at you wherever you go, and they are mostly fun and rewarding. Hogwarts Legacy is a polished game. I played the Switch version, which supposedly runs poorly, but I had zero issues whatsoever. I would recommend Hogwarts Legacy to anyone. It's not a great Harry Potter game, it's just simply a great game. Number 4. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2023. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was developed by Insomniac Games and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. It is the third entry in the Marvel Spider-Man series, acting as a sequel to Marvel's Spider-Man, released in 2018, and a follow-up to Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, released in 2020. The plot follows Peter Parker and Miles Morales as they come into conflict with Kraven the Hunter and the Venom symbiote. I've played many Spider-Man games over the years, and he was one of my favorite characters growing up, so the bar for a PS5 Spider-Man game was pretty high. Not only did Spider-Man 2 exceed that bar, but this was the best Spider-Man game I've ever played. This title boasted cool mini-games, the story was interesting, and the battles were exciting while being kind of tough. The combat in this title reminded me a bit of Arkham City, which is quite the compliment. Most characters were done in a traditional way, but some of the takes were interesting and kept my attention. Harry Osborn had a lot of depth and was really well done. Mary Jane was part love interest while also part Solid Snake, and Kraven the Hunter was an intimidating villain with deadly henchmen. The movement and story in Spider-Man 2 reminded me a bit of the PS2 and GameCube title Ultimate Spider-Man. I felt like I was really playing as a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man while swinging through Manhattan. It was freaking epic when my controller started whispering to me during the Black Suit Spider-Man sections, which was such an immersive and clever move by the developers. The scenes, the story, heck, the entire experience felt like a AAA thrill ride in this Spider-Man universe. Number 3. Dragon Quest VIII, Journey of the Cursed King, released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in 2005. Journey of the Cursed King is an RPG published by Square Enix and is the 8th installment of the Dragon Quest series. This was the first English version of a Dragon Quest game to drop the Dragon Warrior title. DQ8 uses cel shading for the characters and scenery and is the first game in the series to have fully 3D environments and character models. DQ8 follows the silent protagonist and his allies, Jessica, Angelo, and Yangus, as they journey to defeat Dual Magus, a jester magician who cursed the kingdom of Trodain and its people. As a huge fan of the Dragon Quest series, my expectations were quite high for this title, as many consider it amongst the best. I got off to a slow start completing this game, but once I got into the groove, I could not stop playing. Not only does this title have the familiar style, music, and monsters of the series that I love, but the cel-shaded graphics and new features had me impressed and surprised several times. I love the story in this game, I love the progression, I love the setting. Things like the alchemy pot, monster arena, and post-game story kept me addicted day after day after day until I finally completed this love letter to the Dragon Quest series. As far as traditional RPGs go, DQ8 is cream of the crop. Number 2. Astrobot, released for the Sony PlayStation 5 in 2024. Astrobot is a platform game developed by Team Asobi and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. Playing as a robotic protagonist, Astro, the player embarks on a quest to save lost bots, retrieve parts for a PlayStation 5 mothership, and defeat the alien space bully, Nebulax. Astrobot won numerous awards, including the Game Award for Game of the Year at the 2024 Game Awards. This title has sold 1.5 million units as of November 2024, making it one of the best-selling PlayStation 5 games. So while many have said that this was the best title released in 2024 and this game won all kinds of awards, did Astrobot meet the hype for Endara Gaming? You're goddamn right. Once I started this title, I did not want to stop playing. I never needed a break, and I would play until time constraints forced me to stop. Both of my children played Astrobot as well, and they both loved it. Astrobot has great music, fun mechanics and abilities, a unique personality, and amazing cameos from other PlayStation franchises, including Ape Escape, which is a favorite of mine. Was Astrobot the best 3D platformer that I've ever played? Pitting this title against greats like Super Mario 64, Ape Escape, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Banjo-Kazooie, I'd have to say, yes, Astrobot is the best 3D platforming experience that I've ever had the pleasure of playing through. Number 1, Boulders Gate 3, released for the Xbox Series X in 2023. Boulders Gate 3 was released by Larian Studios and is the third main game in the Boulders Gate series. It is based on a modified version of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set and set after the Boulders Gate Descent into Avernus tabletop adventure. I've been playing D&D for several years now, and when I first heard about this game, I suspected it was going to be something special. I pre-ordered the collector's edition and patiently waited for this title to arrive. After getting approximately 45 hours into the game, I realized that this wasn't just the best game I played this year. It's the best game I've played ever. The way Boulders Gate is formatted, from the combat to the progression, the world building, NPC interactions, this title encapsulates Dungeons & Dragons like no other game that I've ever played. BG3 has crazy replayability, with so many options for class builds, companions to recruit, dialogue, alignment, etc. Larian Studios did a fantastic job with this game, and it easily climbed to number 1 on my list for 2024. Hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching my video ranking every game I played in 2024. If you follow me on TikTok and on Twitch, you can watch me play this year's games live. Hope to see you there.